The words landed with the sting of a slap, sharper than anything I had expected to hear on the eve of my son's wedding. Sophia stood in the middle of the kitchen, the white shimmer of her wedding gown hanging pristine on the door behind her, as if mocking the moment. She crossed her arms, her manicured nails catching the light. "Deborah," she said, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, "the best gift you could give our family is to disappear." I froze, dish towel still in my hands. My own son, Paul, leaned against the counter, unable to look at me. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, as though he'd been waiting for this pronouncement. "It's true, Mom," he murmured. "This is supposed to be our special weekend. You're bringing too much negativity." Negativity. That was his word for me. I had spent the morning arranging the floral centerpieces, the afternoon ironing table linens, and the early evening helping Sophia pick through a dozen complaints about everything from the shade of roses to the way the caterer folded napkins. The only negative thing I had done was suggest that maybe ice sculptures shaped like swans were unnecessary for a wedding buffet. I took a breath and tried to steady the shaking in my hands. Where exactly am I supposed to go? My voice surprised me, low, steady, not nearly as fragile as I felt inside. Sophia shrugged, turning back to admire her reflection in the dark oven glass. "I don't know. A hotel? One of your sisters? Honestly, Deborah, it doesn't matter, as long as you're not here tomorrow." I turned my gaze to Paul, my only child, the boy I had raised after my husband's sudden passing. He had once clung to me after nightmares, begged me to sit by his bed until he fell asleep, and promised he'd always look out for me when I grew old. Now, at 40, he stood beside his fiancée like a stranger. "This is my son's house, too," I reminded her. "Actually," Paul cut in, clearing his throat, "it's more Sophia's house now. She's been handling the finances, making improvements. You just gave us some money once?" "Some money once." I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself. That some money was $125,000, my entire savings from decades of teaching English at the high school, plus the modest profit from selling the Victorian home my late husband Robert and I had poured our sweat into restoring. We had sanded floors together, scraped wallpaper, planted roses. When Paul and Sophia said they'd found their dream house, I didn't hesitate. I told myself I was giving my son and his bride a start, a foundation, a chance. And now, 3 years later, my sacrifice had been boiled down to some money once. I looked around the kitchen, my eyes traveling over the granite countertops I had chosen from the showroom, the custom cabinets built with funds I transferred, the gleaming appliances that had drained the last of my savings. The scent of lemon polish still clung to the air, the same polish I had used earlier that day, trying to make the place shine for tomorrow. Inside me, something shifted. It wasn't a break. That would have been too easy, too final. No, it was more like a gear slipping into a new position, a quiet click that changed everything. "You're right," I said softly. Sophia blinked, clearly expecting tears or an argument. Perhaps she had been rehearsing how she would describe my dramatic scene later to her bridesmaids. Paul looked almost relieved. "I should go," I continued. "I'll pack my things and be gone within the hour." Sophia's plastic smile faltered, as though she wasn't sure if she had won or lost. Paul exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's probably for the best, Mom. We can talk after the honeymoon, once things settle down." Talk. As if this were about a minor disagreement over seating charts. As if they hadn't just erased my worth in one casual evening. I turned and climbed the stairs to the guest room. Never my room. Always the guest room, though I had been living there 6 months. Guests eventually leave. That was the unspoken rule. I pulled my old suitcase from the closet and began folding clothes into it with mechanical precision. Downstairs, I could hear them laughing, already planning how to turn my room into a yoga studio, or maybe an office. They didn't even pause to consider the cruelty of it. I stopped at the nightstand where Robert's photograph rested in a simple silver frame. His kind eyes met mine, the eyes of the man who never once made me feel like an imposition in our 40 years together. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm not going down without a fight." Closing the suitcase, I carried it to my car. Not their driveway, not their house. My money had bought it, but it was no longer mine. I sat behind the wheel, the key cold in my hand, and stared at the home that was supposed to be my refuge in widowhood. Instead, it had become a place where my presence was unwelcome, where my sacrifice was rewritten as a burden. The plastic smile of my daughter-in-law, the hollow nod of my son, the word that echoed, "disappear." I pressed the ignition and pulled out my phone. There was only one person to call at that moment: Kevin Morales, the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate years ago. He had warned me about this possibility, told me to protect myself. I hadn't listened then, but I was listening now. It was Saturday evening, nearly dusk, but Kevin picked up after the first ring. "Mrs. Williams? Is everything all right?" I looked back at the glowing windows of the house, at the silhouettes moving inside, oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. "Kevin," I said, my voice steady at last, "I need you to pull every document you have on the house purchase. All of it. Tonight. Because if Sophia wanted me gone, she would get her wish." But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the suitcase balanced on the back seat, my hands still trembling from what had just unfolded. The night air pressed in heavy, the kind that makes you feel smaller than you already do. Through the glowing kitchen window, I could see my son and Sophia laughing, celebrating their little victory. They thought they had gotten rid of me. I pressed Kevin's number again, and when his calm voice answered, something inside me steadied. "Kevin," I said, "I need every document connected to Paul and Sophia's house. Mortgage, deed, loan, everything." He hesitated. "Deborah, has something happened?" I swallowed hard. "They told me tonight that my contribution was nothing but some money once." That's the phrase my son used. On the other end of the line, I heard typing, quick and sharp. "Deborah," Kevin said after a moment, "do you remember when I had you sign those additional forms? The ones you nearly refused because you didn't want to upset Sophia?" I closed my eyes, remembering the afternoon 3 years earlier. I had been standing in his office, nervous, my hands sweating as I signed my name again and again. "I remember. You said it was for my protection, in case something like this happened." He exhaled slowly. "Exactly. You see, that $125,000 was not legally a gift. On paper, it was a loan secured by the property. And because of the way the deed was filed, you are listed as a co-owner." My heart stumbled. "What percentage?" 40%, he said firmly. "The bank, the county records, all recognize you as owning 40% of that house. Sophia never returned her acknowledgement forms, but that doesn't erase your name from the deed. Legally, you are as much an owner as Paul Island." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. For months, I had lived in that house as though I were a guest, careful not to overstep, careful to be grateful. Yet on paper, the house was partly mine, 40% of a property now worth nearly $450,000. I almost laughed, but it came out bitter and sharp. "They have no idea, do they?" "Not a clue," Kevin said, "and you've got leverage. If you want out, you can demand a buyout at fair market value. If they can't afford it, you can force a sale." The word force hummed in my ears like a bell. Me, the quiet widow who had spent her whole life smoothing over conflicts, suddenly held the power to upend theirs. "Kevin," I whispered, "prepare the paperwork. I want them to see it in writing first thing Monday morning. Deborah, think carefully. Once we start this process, there's no turning back." I stared at the house that had been filled with my savings, my labor, my heart. Inside, Sophia was twirling in her wedding veil, her laughter rising like glass breaking. Paul opened a bottle of champagne, no doubt toasting their freedom from the burdensome mother. "There is nothing to turn back to," I said. "They made that choice tonight." When I ended the call, I sat in silence, letting the night wrap around me. My late husband Robert's voice seemed to echo in my head, his steady reassurance that respect is worth more than comfort. He had worked 30 years at the post office to build our life. He would never have allowed our son to treat me this way. I started the engine and pulled away. The headlights lit up the neat hedges, the polished mailbox, the driveway I had partly bought. It was theirs in their minds, but it was mine in the eyes of the law. That thought warmed me as I drove to the modest hotel on the other side of town. The lobby clerk gave me a sympathetic smile when I checked in with only one bag. I wondered what story she imagined: a late flight, a family visit, maybe a traveler just passing through. She could never guess that I was a mother exiled from her own son's home. Upstairs, in the quiet of the room, I unpacked my clothes into the dresser. My phone buzzed with messages, Paul asking if I was all right, Sophia sending a curt line, "Please don't cause drama tomorrow." I set the phone face down. Standing by the window, I looked out at the parking lot lights and felt a calm determination begin to build. They thought I was gone, erased, disposable. But in less than 48 hours they would discover the truth. I was not just some money once. I was the woman who held 40% of their perfect little life, and I was done being ignored. I woke the next morning in the hotel room with the heavy curtains drawn against the rising sun. For the first time in months, I slept without the constant tension of Sophia's sighs or Paul's sidelong glances. The quiet was a balm. Still, as I sipped the bitter coffee from the lobby, I knew peace would be short-lived. By mid-morning, I drove past their house, parking across the street where they could not see me. Through the window, I spotted Sophia parading in her wedding gown again, holding her phone up to show it off on a video call. Paul stood beside her, laughing as if nothing had happened. Their world was perfect, or so they thought. They had no idea that mine had shifted overnight, that the ground beneath them was about to give way. My phone was heavy in my hand as I scrolled to the contact list. The country club's number blinked at me. My signature was on the contract, my credit card on file. It was my $22,000 funding their fairy tale, and I had the power to end it. I pressed call. "Sunset Club Catering? This is Angela," came the cheerful voice. "Hello," I said evenly. "This is Deborah Williams. I need to speak with the manager about tomorrow's wedding reception." "Oh yes, Mrs. Williams," Angela said brightly. "Everything is set. Flowers, hors d'oeuvres, the band." "I'm afraid," I cut in, "that I need to cancel the event." There was a long pause. "Cancel? But, ma'am, it's less than 24 hours away. The food has been prepared, the staff scheduled." "I understand, and I'm prepared to pay the cancellation fees. The deposit and contract are in my name. I am the one responsible, correct?" Yes, you are," she admitted, shuffling papers. "But surely you'd like to discuss this with the bride and groom first." "No need," I replied, watching through the window as Sophia twirled in her veil for what must have been the 100th time. "I am making an executive decision. Cancel everything." Angela's voice faltered. "Very well, Mrs. Williams. We'll process the cancellation immediately and send the invoice to your address." "Send it to the Hampton Inn," I said. "Room 212. I'll settle it tonight." When I ended the call, my chest felt lighter, almost giddy. I had just erased their centerpiece celebration with a few quiet words. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Why should I bankroll a spectacle for two people who had told me to disappear? That night, near midnight, my phone rang so violently I thought it might shatter. I answered, bracing myself. "What did you do?" Sophia's voice screeched through the speaker, high and raw. "The club called us. They said you canceled our reception. Our wedding reception." "I honored your request," I said calmly, muting the television. "You wanted me to disappear, so I did, and I took my money with me." "You can't do this!" she cried. "There are 200 people expecting dinner tomorrow. The flowers, the band, the photographer." "Sounds like a problem," I said, "but not mine." Paul's voice cut in, frantic. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just ruin our wedding because of a disagreement." "I didn't cancel your wedding," I reminded him. "You can still get married. I canceled the reception that cost me $22,000. There was stunned silence. I had never told them the exact amount. $22,000? Sophia whispered. "For food and music?" "Did you think it was free?" I asked. "Did you imagine the money fairy left envelopes under your pillows?" Paul stammered. "But we can't tell everyone there's no reception. People flew in. Amanda's family is here." "Then improvise. Order pizzas. Rent a tent. McDonald's caters now, I hear." Sophia sobbed, ugly and loud, the kind of crying that once might have melted me. Now it only sounded hollow. "How could you?" she moaned. "We trusted you." "You trusted me?" I said, my voice firm. "You told me the best gift I could give your family was to disappear. I'm simply complying. Tomorrow you'll have exactly what you asked for, me gone." I hung up before either could answer. Leaning back against the pillows, I let the silence settle around me. On the nightstand sat the signed receipt from the club, proof that I had finally drawn a line. For years I had been the safety net, the silent checkbook, the mother who said yes when everything inside her screamed no. But not anymore. For the first time in decades, I had acted not as their benefactor but as my own protector. And though tomorrow's wedding would descend into chaos, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never again be dismissed as some money once. By the time morning came, I had 37 missed calls and over 40 text messages. I ignored them all. Instead, I ordered a proper breakfast from room service, scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee, and sat by the window with the Sunday paper. It was the most civilized morning I'd had in months. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my hotel door. Through the peephole I saw Paul, his tuxedo shirt wrinkled, his tie hanging loose. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. For a moment I considered not answering, but then I opened the door just enough for him to see my face. "Mom," he said, his voice ragged, "we need to talk." "You should be getting ready for your big day," I replied, not moving aside. "This is about that," he said quickly. "Please, just a few minutes." I let him in, watching as he collapsed into the armchair, running his hands through his hair. He looked older than 40, beaten down by the weight of a life he had built on someone else's foundation. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why would you do this to us?" "To you?" I repeated, my tone sharper than I intended. "Paul, this isn't about punishment. This is about truth." I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a notebook. It wasn't fancy, just lined pages filled with neat handwriting. I placed it on the table between us. "This is the ledger," I said. "Every dollar I've given you in the last 3 years." He frowned, flipping it open. His eyes moved down the lists. Utility bills, grocery store payments, car repairs, credit card balances. Month after month, line after line. "You're exaggerating," he muttered. "No," I said. "Add it. You'll see." Reluctantly, he pulled out his phone calculator. I sat in silence as his fingers tapped, the numbers climbing higher. His shoulders slumped when he reached the total. 58,000, he whispered. "On top of the 125,000 for your down payment," I reminded him. "That's $205,000, Paul. 205,000 that I have poured into your life since Robert passed." He shut the notebook as if it burned. "We were always planning to pay you back." I raised an eyebrow. "Were you?" "Because I've seen Sophia shopping for handbags that cost more than a mortgage payment. I've seen travel brochures on your kitchen counter. I've seen dinners at restaurants that cost $300 a night. I've heard every excuse for why you're just a little short this month, but not once did you mention repayment." His face went pale. "We just wanted to live a little. We thought you understood." "What I understand," I said slowly, "is that you and your wife have trained me to believe my only value is financial. You take, and I give. That cycle ends today." He looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath. The words came out cold and steady, like ice water. "I am selling my share of the house." Paul blinked. "Your share? What are you talking about?" "Kevin reminded me last night," I said. "The deed lists me as a co-owner. I own 40%. If you can't buy me out at market value, then the house will be sold and the proceeds divided." He shook his head violently. "That's impossible. That house is ours. We bought it. We live in it." With my $125,000, I cut in. Money that didn't evaporate into thin air. Money that secured my name on the deed. Money that makes me an owner, not a guest. Paul stood and began pacing the room. "Sophia will never agree to this. You'll destroy us. You'll ruin everything." "Everything?" I asked. "You mean the lifestyle you can't actually afford without my help? The house you believe is yours alone? The wedding reception you expected me to pay for? I'm not destroying anything, Paul. I'm simply removing the crutch." He stopped pacing, his eyes desperate. "Mom, please. Not today. After the honeymoon we can figure this out. Just don't do this now." I shook my head. "The time for patience is over. You and Sophia told me to disappear. Very well, but I will not vanish empty-handed. For a long moment we just stared at each other, mother and son, standing on opposite sides of a line that could never be erased. Finally, Paul's shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me?" "I want respect," I said. "I want acknowledgement that I am not your personal bank, and I want my 40% of the house. Those are not negotiable." He covered his face with his hands. "This will destroy Sophia." "No," I corrected him. "This will force Sophia to face consequences. Something her parents and I should have made her do years ago." When he left, his tuxedo shirt looked even more wrinkled than before, his steps heavier. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heartbeat finally slowing. For the first time in years, I felt the balance of power shift back to me. $205,000. That was the price of my silence, and I was done being silent. By Monday morning, I thought I had already seen the worst of their desperation. I was wrong. The hotel phone rang just after 9. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was firm but polite. "Mrs. Williams, this is Detective Ronald Green with the local police department. I'd like to meet with you regarding a report we received." My stomach dropped. "What kind of report?" "An anonymous caller expressed concern that you may be a victim of financial elder abuse and possibly experiencing cognitive decline," he explained carefully. I nearly laughed at the irony. "Detective, I assure you, I'm in full possession of my faculties. But yes, I'd be happy to meet." We arranged to sit down at the station that afternoon. As soon as I hung up, I knew exactly who had made that call. Sophia and Paul weren't just panicking. They were trying to weaponize the system against me. They wanted me painted as senile, confused, unfit to handle my own affairs. I gathered my evidence: bank statements, canceled checks, wire transfers, every page of my ledger. The notebook with neat lines documenting 3 years of little helps. A grand total of $58,000 beyond the $125,000 that bought their home. $205,000 in black and white, each entry dated and signed. At the station, Detective Green was younger than I expected, early 40s, with patient eyes. He invited me into his office, a tidy room with framed commendations on the wall. "Mrs. Williams," he began, "I want to make sure you're safe and cared for." The person who called seemed genuinely worried. "I'm sure she did," I said dryly. "My daughter-in-law is very good at pretending concern when it serves her purpose." I spread the documents across his desk. "This is the reality. For 3 years I've been supporting my son and his wife. Mortgage payments, grocery bills, car repairs, utilities. In addition, I contributed $125,000 for the down payment on their house, which makes me a legal co-owner of 40%. His brows lifted slightly as he studied the records. "This is substantial." "It is," I agreed. And when I finally drew a line, when I canceled a $22,000 reception and told them I intended to sell my share of the house, they suddenly decided I must be incompetent. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on a voicemail Sophia had left at 3 in the morning. Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Dorothy, this is insane behavior. Normal people don't destroy their families' lives over hurt feelings. We're worried about you. Maybe you need to see someone. Get some help. It is a flightman." When it ended, I looked him in the eye. "Does that sound like concern to you, Detective? Or does it sound like manipulation?" He scribbled notes. "Have you experienced any memory issues, Mrs. Williams? Difficulty managing your affairs?" "None whatsoever," I said. "I manage my own finances. I drive. I live independently. The only decline in my life has been the way my son and his wife treat me." He nodded slowly. "Your attorney verified these documents?" "Yes. Kevin Morales, who handled my late husband's estate. He reminded me that my name is on the deed. I own 40% of that property." Detective Green leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "I believe you, Mrs. Williams. And from what I see here, you're not the one being abused. You've been the one enabling others." The words hit me like a strange kind of truth. I had enabled them, hadn't I? Every check I wrote, every bill I quietly paid, every time I said yes instead of no. I had built the net they thought they could fall into forever. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I'll be closing the case as unfounded," he said, "but I want to provide you with information on elder financial abuse resources. You've clearly been taken advantage of." If you ever want to pursue charges, this documentation is a solid start." Relief washed over me, mixed with a simmering anger. They had tried to have me declared unfit, tried to twist the narrative into their control. Instead, they had handed me another weapon, official recognition that I was not the problem. As I left the station, the afternoon sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. I pulled out my phone and saw Paul's name flashing again. I answered, just to hear his reaction. "Mom," he said quickly, "the police called. They said they're not pursuing the welfare check." "That's right," I replied, calm as a still pond, "because I'm not the one being abused here." "What's that supposed to mean?" His voice tightened. "It means you and Sophia have been draining me for years. It means the detective was very interested in my documentation, and it means your tactics don't work anymore." There was silence on the line. Finally, he said, "Can we at least meet? Talk like adults?" "Fine," I said. "Tomorrow at 2:00, Kevin Morales' office. Bring Sophia, and bring a realistic proposal for how you plan to handle the house. I'm not negotiating over the phone." When I hung up, I smiled to myself. They had tried to paint me as weak, incompetent, ready to disappear. Instead, I was walking into the next round stronger than ever, armed with the truth and the law on my side. The welfare check had backfired. The game had changed. Kevin Morales' office smelled faintly of polished wood and old law books. The walls were lined with shelves of heavy volumes, spines cracked from decades of use. A long oak table stretched across the conference room, polished to a mirror shine. I arrived 10 minutes early, papers tucked neatly in my leather folder. For once in my life, I felt prepared, armored, even. At 2:00 sharp, the door opened. Paul shuffled in first, shoulders slumped, jaw tight. Sophia followed, her eyes swollen from crying, though she had tried to cover it with makeup. She looked smaller than her usual commanding self, her posture rigid, her voice hushed as she greeted no one in particular. Kevin entered last, calm and professional, setting a stack of files in front of him. He nodded toward me. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for being punctual. Let's begin." Sophia leaned forward, desperation already dripping from her words. "We didn't understand, Deborah. We thought the money was a gift. We never knew your name was on the deed." "That's because you never read the papers I signed," I replied evenly. "Or rather, you never wanted to. But ignorance doesn't erase the law." Kevin cleared his throat and opened the folder. "Here are the facts. 3 years ago, Mrs. Williams contributed $125,000 toward the down payment. She has since provided an additional $58,000 in direct financial support. That totals $205,000. The deed lists Mrs. Williams as co-owner of 40% of the property. All of this is documented and legally binding." Paul rubbed his temples. "We had no idea." "You would have," Kevin said crisply. "If Sophia had signed the acknowledgement forms I sent 3 times, you ignored them. But Mrs. Williams's signature was enough to secure her ownership." Sophia's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Kevin leaned back. "So here is where we stand. Option 1. You buy out Mrs. Williams's 40% share at current market value. The house is worth approximately $450,000. 40% of that is $180,000. You would need to pay that amount within a reasonable time frame." Sophia gasped. "$180,000? We don't have that kind of money." Option 2, Kevin continued without flinching, is to sell the property. After realtor fees and closing costs, you would likely net around $420,000. Mrs. Williams would receive approximately $168,000, and you would retain the remainder. Paul looked at me, eyes wide, pleading. "That would mean we'd have to move. We'd lose everything." I met his gaze calmly. "You'd lose a house you can't afford without me. There's a difference." Sophia finally found her voice, high and shrill. "There has to be another way, some kind of compromise." I folded my hands, letting the silence stretch. "No, Sophia. There is no option 3. Her face crumpled. "You can't do this. Not to family." "Family doesn't tell me to disappear," I said, my tone cutting. "Family doesn't erase $205,000 as some money once. Family doesn't call the police and claim I'm losing my mind. You forfeited the privilege of calling me family when you treated me like an ATM." Paul's voice cracked. "Mom, please." If we just had more time. I've already given you years, I interrupted. Years of paying your bills, your groceries, your emergencies. $205,000 worth of time. The clock has run out. Kevin slid the documents across the table. These are the formal notices. You have 30 days to make a decision. Buy out Mrs. Williams's share or agree to list the house for sale. Paul stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Sophia buried her face in her hands. I stood, smoothing my skirt. 30 days, I repeated. No extensions, no excuses, no secret handouts. I am finished subsidizing your life. Sophia shot up, her voice trembling. You'll ruin us. People will know we couldn't even afford our own wedding. Everyone will think we're broke. Then maybe, I said coldly. You should have thought about that before you told me the best gift I could give your family was to disappear. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Paul looked at me with something close to recognition, as if for the first time in years he was seeing not the mother who always rescued him, but the woman who had finally drawn a line. Kevin gathered the files, signaling the meeting was over. We'll reconvene in 30 days, unless you have an agreement sooner. I turned to leave, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. As I opened the door, I glanced back once more. Remember, Paul, there is no option 3. Then I walked out, head high, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of the life they had built on my sacrifice. 2 weeks into their 30-day deadline, the phone rang again. Paul's voice was thin with exhaustion. Mom, please, we need to talk. Can we meet at Kevin's office? I agreed. When I arrived, I saw them sitting together at the long oak table. Paul looked haggard, his shirt wrinkled, his tie pulled loose. Sophia had mascara smudged beneath her eyes, as though she'd been crying for days. The woman who once radiated entitlement now looked cornered, a child caught in her own lies. Kevin greeted us and opened a fresh file. All right, he said. We have 20 days remaining before the notice becomes binding. Do you have a proposal? Paul cleared his throat. We can't raise $180,000. But maybe you'd accept a payment plan? Sophia leaned forward desperately. We'd pay every month, we swear. We just need more time. I shook my head slowly. Why would I trust you with another debt? You already owe me $58,000 in so-called emergencies. Not once did you even attempt repayment. Paul's shoulders slumped. Then what do you want from us? Finally, the question I'd been waiting for. I took a breath and laid out my terms. I will agree to sell my share to you for less than market value, $75,000 instead of $180,000, but there are conditions. Sophia's eyes widened. 75? That's merciful. What's the catch? Kevin raised his pen, ready to take notes. First, I said firmly, Sophia will secure a job within 60 days and keep it for no less than 2 years. You are 37 years old, healthy and educated. There is no reason you cannot contribute. Sophia recoiled. But I manage the household. You manage shopping trips and brunches, I cut in. You will earn income or this agreement is void. Her mouth opened, then closed. Paul looked at her, silently pleading. Second, I continued, you will sell one of your cars. Use the proceeds to pay down existing debt. You do not need 2 vehicles when you can barely afford one. Paul rubbed his temples but nodded faintly. Third, I said, you will adhere to a strict household budget. No restaurant meals, no new credit cards, no frivolous purchases. For 2 years. Sophia groaned. That's like living in financial prison. No, I corrected. That's called living within your means. Kevin tapped his pen. And how will compliance be monitored? Monthly check-ins, I replied. Bank statements, proof of employment, debt reports, all submitted to Kevin. If you violate any condition, the full market amount becomes due immediately. $180,000, no exceptions. Silence filled the room. Paul stared at the table. Sophia's jaw trembled. Finally, Paul whispered, This feels impossible. What feels impossible, I said, is continuing to rescue you while you waste every opportunity. I am offering you a chance. Whether you take it is up to you. Sophia's voice cracked. You're supposed to be our family. Families don't treat each other like this. I leaned forward, my tone sharp. Families don't tell their mothers to disappear. Families don't erase $205,000 as some money once. Families don't call the police and claim incompetence when the money dries up. Don't lecture me about family. Tears spilled down her cheeks. For a brief second I almost softened. Then I remembered her laughter in the kitchen, her voice calling me a burden. No, softness was wasted here. Kevin cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, do you accept these terms? Paul and Sophia exchanged a long, tortured look. At last Paul spoke. We accept. All of them? Kevin pressed. Yes, Paul said. Sophia nodded reluctantly, her expression bitter as poison. Kevin began drafting the agreement. The scratch of his pen echoed in the heavy silence. When he slid the papers across the table, Paul signed quickly. Sophia hesitated, her hand trembling, before scrawling her name. As Kevin notarized the signatures, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. Triumph, because I had reclaimed my power. Sorrow, because it had come to this, to binding contracts with my own child, conditions and punishments where there should have been gratitude and love. When the papers were filed, Kevin folded his hands. This agreement will remain in force for 2 years. Violate it, and the original obligation returns. You may consider yourselves fortunate that Mrs. Williams offered leniency. Paul nodded miserably. Sophia stared at the floor. I stood, gathering my folder. I hope, I said quietly, that this teaches you what I should have taught long ago. Actions have consequences. Then I left the room, my heels striking the hardwood, each step sounding like a gavel. 6 months later, I woke in a place that finally felt like home. My apartment at the senior community was modest, just 2 bedrooms with pale walls and sunlight streaming through wide windows. Outside, a walking trail curved past a small garden where neighbors tended tomatoes and roses. It was not the Victorian house Robert and I once restored, and it was not the suburban palace Paul and Sophia had claimed as their own, but it was mine, entirely mine. On the coffee table sat a folder marked Financial Agreement, Williams Household. Each month, Kevin forwarded their reports, bank statements, debt payments, proof of Sophia's income. I reviewed them with quiet satisfaction. For the first time in years, Paul and Sophia were standing on their own 2 feet. Not gracefully, not without complaint, but standing. One morning in late spring, my phone rang. The number was familiar, but I hesitated before answering. Deborah? Sophia's voice was lighter than I remembered. I wanted to tell you some news. I got promoted, office manager now. I never thought I'd be good at something like this. Her laugh surprised me. It was genuine, not brittle or forced. Congratulations, I said. How do you feel? Exhausted, she admitted, but proud. For the first time, I understand how hard it is to save even $100. I used to think money just appeared. Now I see what you sacrificed for us. I leaned back in my chair, the phone warm against my ear. I'm glad you're learning. It was long overdue. There was a pause. Deborah, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the panicked one I gave in Kevin's office. I was entitled. I treated you like an endless ATM. I told myself you were dramatic when you asked for respect, but the truth is, I was cruel. For a moment, emotion caught in my throat. I had waited years to hear those words. Thank you, I said softly. That matters more than you know. She cleared her throat. Paul's changing too. We cook at home now. We take walks instead of shopping. It's quieter, better. That's what happens when you live within your means, I said. Would you, her voice trembled, would you come to dinner one night? Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and conversation. No talk about money, I promise. The old me would have said yes instantly, desperate to patch the wound. The new me thought carefully. I'd like that. But let's start with lunch in a public place. Baby steps. Her relief was audible. Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable. After we hung up, I sat quietly, staring at Robert's photo on the shelf. For the first time since his death, I felt as though I was building a life he would be proud of. That afternoon, I joined the community book club. We met in a sunny room with shelves stacked high and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Jason Carter, A retired teacher with kind eyes made a joke about the plot of the novel we were reading, and I laughed louder than I had in years. Later, he asked if I'd like to join him for lunch the next day. For the first time in decades, the invitation wasn't about money, or obligation, or guilt. It was about companionship. Walking back to my apartment, I realized something important. Family is not defined only by blood. Family is who values you, who listens, who shows up without demanding payment. Paul and Sophia might learn that lesson eventually. Or they might not. Either way, I had reclaimed my life. In the evening, as the sun dipped low, I stepped out onto the balcony. Neighbors waved from the garden, laughter drifting up with the scent of cut grass. I felt no bitterness, only clarity. I had given $205,000 to people who dismissed me. I had canceled a $22,000 reception to reclaim my voice. I had forced a reckoning with contracts and conditions, and in the process I discovered something priceless: dignity, independence, peace. The phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Thank you for not giving up on us." A second text followed from Jason. "Looking forward to tomorrow. I'll bring the coffee if you bring the conversation." I smiled, setting the phone aside. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next demand, the next crisis, the next manipulation. Instead, I was free to decide whom I let into my circle and on what terms. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes the best gift you can give is not money, not silence, but boundaries. And sometimes, when you finally pull away the net, the people who depended on it learn to fly.